This video is brought to you by all of my wonderful patrons and channel members. And if you are a channel member or a patron, make sure you go check the feeds because I did an exclusive stories video a couple days ago. And if you want to get yourself some extra content and you're not a patron or channel member, think about joining. And without any further ado, let's begin. This is a call I answered while I was still pretty new to the job. This did occur in 2009, so I apologize for any mistakes in my memory. It was in the morning time around 7 a.m. 911 rings and there's a male in his 30s screaming into the phone that he needs help. When you yell into a microphone, it's possible that it will cut out completely. So after getting him to calm down just enough to give us the address, we start the police that way. He kept screaming, my kids, oh my god, no. So we go ahead and start an ambulance to wait in the area until police check out what was going on. During all of this, we're trying to figure out what had happened, and he is so distraught that we can hardly understand him. Around this time, another caller in the apartment complex calls and says there's some guy screaming about his kids being killed. Detectives who just started coming in for the day all rush outside to head that way. The call was about a block and a half from the police station. Turns out the father who called had left his kids with their aunt and uncle to be babysat the night before. The killer was an ex-boyfriend of the aunt who came into the apartment, shot the aunt and uncle, then went into the kids' room, shot and stabbed one child and stabbed the other, aged 7 and 10, to keep them from identifying him. The only survivor was the murderer's 1-year-old in the apartment who was too young to identify him. The 1-year-old was left at the scene and was found roaming among the bodies. It should be noted that this took place in an apartment around 6 p.m. the night before and several gunshots went off. No one called 911 when this happened. I can only imagine the horror that father walked into that morning, and his screams will be forever ingrained in my mind. The person responsible was caught and charged. I received a call on a non-emergency number because it was coming from overseas in the Middle East region. The man that called was reporting that he had just received a very disturbing call from his friend who lived in my district. The caller said he kept saying, "I see dead people." I told him I would send a deputy over to do a welfare check because it sounded like a possible psychotic break in an elderly male. When the deputies got there, they met a relative of the man's family outside who had just rushed over to the upscale apartment complex because he was on the phone with his relative and heard arguing and loud bangs and then no response. So the deputies and the relatives all go to the second floor and see that the relative's door was ajar. They tried to open it, but something was blocking the door. They shoved the door open and found 2 dead male bodies inside, the relative and his roommate. They called for the sergeant and backup from SWAT, who used a robot to get a look inside the man's apartment from the balcony because the front door was locked. They observed a male laying on the couch, facing the back of the couch and not moving. They knew he was armed and dangerous. After some time of observing the male, the SWAT team used an instrument to poke at the subject, and he didn't move. So they entered the apartment and found that he had committed suicide with a gunshot to the head. From the position he was laying in, they could not see blood or a gun and didn't know he was already dead. The next day, this incident was in the newspaper and they used the notes of my call. So the headline was, "I see dead people. 3 dead." I was mortified that the media could access police files, or probably in this case they were monitoring the police scanner and used my notes. I was very cautious after that as to what I typed in the notes of the call, knowing that my words could end up being a headline. I responded to a call while my dispatcher kept the caller on the phone. Dispatch was relaying a blow-by-blow to me. The caller was a woman reporting her boyfriend was outside with a gun and was threatening suicide. My dispatcher heard gunshots in the background. When I was a mile away, my dispatcher heard the final gunshot. I arrived a minute later and found the boyfriend dead on the deck. He had shot himself in the shoulder with a shotgun. There is a major artery passing through the shoulder that goes to the arm. The shot hit his artery and all of his blood had been pumped out of his body in the minute it took me to get there. That was pretty intense. As a side note, in my mind this was an accidental suicide. This couple had been arguing. The boyfriend was threatening suicide, but a man with a gun will shoot himself in the head. But this was a shoulder shot. As we all know from the old cowboy movies, getting shot in the shoulder is not fatal. Apparently, this guy was wrong. Furthermore, this guy waited until he heard my sirens before he shot himself, so I think he was expecting to be saved. I call these a sympathy shot. The idea being to survive an apparent suicide attempt in order to make their partner feel guilty and heap on the sympathy. One evening I received a call from a woman who was letting out a piercing and blood-curdling scream that I will never forget. Normally when the caller is excited, the protocol is for the dispatcher to lower their voice and try to calm the caller. In this case, I had to do the opposite or I was not going to get any information about what was happening. I shouted at her, telling her to tell me what was going on. She had to tell me something. So she hysterically managed to get the words out that he is killing someone. It turns out that it was a murder in progress. The woman lived with her husband and her brother, who both despised one another. This particular night, the husband said something nasty to the brother and the brother just lost it. He pulled out a knife and just began hacking away at the husband. Thus, when the woman called, she was witnessing the murder of her husband at the hands of her brother. When the police arrived, the suspect stepped out the front door with his hands up. He was covered in so much blood that when he proned out on the ground, his body imprint was left in a pool of blood on the ground. When he gave himself up to the officers, he told them that they should just dig a hole and bury him in it when they saw what he had just done inside the house. When I was still working full-time for the fire department, I often took shifts working the medical part of the 911 center. Back in 2006, when flip phones were still most common, pinning down a location was not very easy. We were still using primitive cell phone location technology, which didn't help as it only gave us a general area of miles instead of feet. A young girl called in using her mom's flip phone, and she told me that her mom had fallen down the stairs and wouldn't wake up. After several questions, I figured out the mother wasn't breathing. And this was the scariest part of the call because the girl couldn't give us an address. And when someone stops breathing, the seconds count. As much as I tried, I couldn't get the little girl to tell me her address. All she could tell me was that she lived on a farm, which wasn't helpful at all because a huge portion of my district is rural farmlands. While talking to the young girl, I asked her how long ago her mom fell down the stairs, and she told me that she fell down just after a TV show she was watching started. I looked at the clock and it was just past the top of the hour, so piecing it together, I surmised she must have fallen down at least 30 minutes ago. I asked the young girl to focus and try to tell me where she lives. I asked her if she knew the street name, and she said she didn't. I asked her if she could tell me any landmarks, and that's when she told me that the church she goes to is just down the street. By this time, my supervisor and police chief were looking at a map and they located 12 churches within the rural areas. Since she couldn't tell us which church, we decided to dispatch all of our units, giving them a specific target. Once they got to the target, we instructed each unit to turn on their lights and sirens and drive around the area. With only one fire station with 2 ambulances and several fire rescue vehicles and 4 police officers to cover a huge area, we dispatched them to cover around the churches as the farmsteads were sometimes miles apart from each other. Hearing our call over the radio, several sheriff deputies and highway patrol troopers decided to join in and help. We are now almost 15 minutes into the call. We told the young girl to take the phone and go outside and listen for the police cars and fire trucks. It seemed like forever, but she eventually heard the sirens from one of our vehicles but couldn't see it. We told each responder to stop and turn off their sirens, and then one by one we had them turn them back on so we could tell which one was closest to her. It turned out to be one of the fire rigs, so we sent everyone to their position and then they spread out to cover the general area, all with their sirens on again. Eventually, one state trooper pulled onto her street and the girl could see him coming. We pinned down the location as he got closer and the sirens got louder until she told us he was right in front of their house. By the time the trooper got inside the house, the mother was breathing and trying to get her bearings and get up. We got medical on the scene and she was transported to the hospital with a broken back. The young girl was given a little award from her police department for her bravery in the call as she kept her calm and did everything we told her to do. The mother made a full recovery with no brain damage. Doctors don't know if she did indeed stop breathing, but only for a short time, or if the girl didn't understand the questions and thought sleeping meant not breathing or something. This call is a reminder why we don't stress enough to teach your kids your last names, their phone numbers, and phone numbers of their parents, and most importantly, their home address. And if there's a landline phone in the house, to use that to call 911 over using a cell phone, as the landline will give us an exact address. While cell phones, even though they are a lot better to track now, sometimes only give us a location of several hundred yards. One of the scariest calls I've answered actually came in on a non-emergency line. A Spanish-speaking woman called to report her husband had been causing problems in the home. He wasn't there, and the conversation proceeded calmly with the help of an interpreter. I had obtained her address and was asking her a few other preliminary questions when suddenly I could hear a male voice shouting and several people screaming. I heard the phone drop. I instructed my coworker who was working on the main police channel to send officers code 3, lights and sirens, but the yelling and screaming seemed to go on in my ear. Suddenly, a man picked up the phone and began speaking in Spanish. Through the interpreter, he explained that everything was fine and there was no need to send the police. I began to question him about who he was and what had happened, hoping to keep the line open. Just then, I heard the sounds of officers bursting in and ordering him down on the ground. Turns out he had broken in and repeatedly stabbed his wife with a knife in front of the children. Thankfully, she survived. That call was later used as a training tool for classes dealing with domestic violence. About 10 years ago, I got dispatched to a domestic disturbance, which all officers will tell you can be the most dangerous calls. The dispatcher was relaying information to us from a 911 operator that was taking the call. A woman had called saying her ex-husband was threatening to kill their 2 small children. The man hit the woman and she dropped the phone, but the operator could still hear everything that was being said. The man said he was not letting her have the children and he would kill them, but not his ex-wife. He was saying he wanted her to suffer like she made him suffer. After hearing all that, I could not go fast enough. It seemed like it was taking forever to get there. Then the dispatcher said shots fired and my heart dropped. Other units were heading to the house, but I knew I would be the first on scene. The last bit of information I got was the line went dead and they were trying to call it back, but there was no answer. My sergeant was just a few minutes behind me and he radioed to me to hold on the scene and to not enter the house until more units were there. When I pulled up, I didn't hold. I couldn't. I pulled my gun and ran into the house thinking I was going to find 4 bodies. I took cover on the side of the doorway and I could see a man holding a handgun. I ordered the man to drop the gun, which he did. I then looked further into the room and saw the woman sitting on a chair holding her face where he had hit her. By now, 2 more units showed up. Me and 2 other officers ran up the stairs and found the 2 children holding each other crying. I had to go outside because I was shaking so badly. My sergeant started yelling at me for going in without backup, but he could see the kind of shape I was in, so he let it go for then. My sergeant told me to go home, which I did. When I got home, I broke down in my wife's arms. I've gotten on a lot of calls, but that's one I'll never forget. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, share it with all your friends, all that good stuff. If you want to email your own story, email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. And if you would like to help support the channel as well as get yourself some exclusive content, become a patron or channel member. You can click the join button down by the subscribe button, or you can head over to the Patron link in the description. I hope everyone is having a great day, and I appreciate you checking out this video. I know I tend to do a lot of the actual 911 calls, but I figured this was interesting because it was a 911 dispatcher's own personal, scary story. And I know not everyone will think everything's scary. Horror is like comedy, it's subjective. One thing that might scare someone else isn't going to scare someone else. For some reason, people are afraid of spiders and snakes, and I love them. I love them a lot. But yeah, everyone's got their own things that are scary, so I hope you enjoyed this compilation of stories, and I will catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye.